right now, your cells are hoarding this incredibly old, basically a 3,000-year-old secret.
They really are, yeah.
And, if you find yourself struggling to lose weight, or maybe your cholesterol's high even though you eat pretty reasonably, it might not actually be a lack of willpower.
No, not at all.
Right? It might be because your metabolism is still literally trying to survive a Bronze Age winter. So, welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we are taking a radically different look at the human body. We aren't just looking at, flesh and bone. We are looking at the literal biological blueprints of your existence.
Yeah, treating the body as a living, breathing, historical archive.
Exactly. And to do this, we're pulling from a really comprehensive report today. It's a long read titled Genetic Odyssey, 3,000 Years in Your Cells.
Which is a fantastic piece of research.
It is, and we're also using its accompanying guides on interpreting ancestry results for, actual clinical health clues.
Yeah.
So the mission today for this deep dive is to decode those ancient messages. We want you to stop feeling like a stranger in your own body.
Which is how a lot of people feel, honestly.
They do, because we're moving past abstract history here. We want to understand the physical, measurable ways that geography, survival strategies, and, historical trauma are dictating how your cells behave today.
And we are anchoring all of this in hard biological evidence. I mean, we are looking at the physical mechanisms of human endurance.
It's basically a language, right?
Yeah, a language written in base pairs and molecular markers. And the wild part is that we are only just now beginning to translate it with any real accuracy.
So let's ground this with the first major case study from that report. I want you to picture a completely typical morning in the village of Förste.
In Lower Saxony, Germany.
Right. It's an ordinary weekday. You've got people scraping ice off their windshields, holding their travel mugs.
Just everyday life.
Yeah. Kids waiting for the school bus is the absolute definition of modern, mundane life. But right under the pavement of that village, literally beneath the foundations of those houses, is the Lichtenstein Cave.
And that cave held a massive secret.
It did. Researchers found perfectly preserved human remains inside that cave, dating all the way back to the Bronze Age.
Which, just as an archaeological event, discovering Bronze Age remains is hugely significant. But the researchers working the Lichtenstein Cave, they wanted to go a lot deeper than just cataloging some old artifacts.
They wanted the DNA, right?
Exactly. They wanted to extract the ancient DNA from these remains. And I have to stress, that is a monumental scientific challenge.
I was going to ask about that, actually, because, my mind immediately goes to the methodology. Isn't there a massive contamination risk with something like that?
Oh, the risk is astronomical.
Right, because if a bone has just been sitting in a cave for 3,000 years, and then it's dug up and handled by archaeologists and lab techs, how do they even know they aren't just sequencing the DNA of some modern grad student who, happened to breathe on the sample?
That is the exact hurdle that held back ancient DNA sequencing for decades, literally. To circumvent it, researchers focus on very specific, deeply protected areas of the skeleton.
Like where?
Primarily the petrous bone. It's a highly dense part of the skull right near the inner ear. And because it's so incredibly dense, it acts almost like a natural vault.
Oh, wow. So it keeps the outside world out.
Exactly. It protects the endogenous DNA, meaning the original human's DNA, from environmental bacteria and, modern human contamination.
But even then, how can they be 100% sure?
Well, they also look for specific degradation patterns because over thousands of years, the chemical structure of DNA physically frays at the ends.
Yeah, frays. Like a rope.
Sort of, yeah. At a molecular level, cytosine molecules lose an amino group and they actually turn into uracil. Modern DNA just doesn't have that specific pattern of chemical decay.
Okay, that makes sense.
So when the computer algorithms span the fragments, they can effectively filter out any of that modern contamination by actively looking for the chemical signature of extreme age.
That is wild.
Yeah.
So they successfully pulled this highly degraded, frayed, 3,000-year-old DNA out of the petrous bone, and they sequence it.
And they get a viable profile, yes.
But the report says they didn't stop there. This is the part that blows my mind. They went out into the modern village, the people literally waiting for the bus and drinking their coffee, and they swabbed the DNA of 300 current residents.
They did. They actively compared the genetic blueprints of the modern locals with the blueprints of the people buried inside the hill.
And what happens next? Because I imagine the lab waiting for these results must have been so tense.
Oh, the lab went completely silent when the data came back? because they ran the comparison algorithms, mapping the tiny, fragmented base pairs from the Bronze Age against the fully intact genomes of the modern villagers.
Yeah.
Out of those 300 modern locals, the data revealed that 2 of them were direct, unbroken descendants of the specific individuals buried in that cave.
Wait, really?
2 current residents.
2 modern-day people walking around Förste, directly descended from the Bronze Age remains beneath their feet.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because I'm trying to wrap my head around the sheer scale of that continuity. We are talking about 120 generations on one hill.
It's almost unfathomable. It really is.
Yeah.
Let's just look at human history over the last 3,000 years. You have the Roman Empire rising, conquering most of the known world, and then entirely collapsing.
Right.
The Middle Ages happened. Plagues wiped out vast swaths of the population. We had the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, world wars, borders being completely redrawn time and time again.
The entire world changed around them.
Yes, but through all of that geopolitical chaos, for 120 generations, this specific family never left that hill. They just stayed put. I mean, it almost defies logic when you consider what we usually assume about human migration and displacement.
It deeply challenges our assumptions about geographic mobility, for sure. Most historical narratives really emphasize mass migrations, conquests, sweeping population replacement.
Right, people moving constantly.
Exactly. But the biological continuity found in Förste demonstrates that DNA can be a meticulously accurate, static, historical chronicle.
It's better than a history book.
Much better. Think about traditional archives. Paper burns, right? Stone monuments erode over time. Entire languages are forgotten. But the genetic archive is self-replicating.
It keeps copying itself.
Right. This unbroken 120-generation lineage is a testament to survival that a historian could only dream of uncovering in a written text.
Okay, so the DNA sequence clearly survived. The hardware, the A, C, T, and G base pairs, tracks an unbroken line of addresses and geographic loyalty.
Yes, the addresses stayed the same.
But what about the software running on that hardware? Like, what about the actual experiences of those 120 generations? Because, I mean, we're usually taught that DNA is just this static blueprint.
Which is a very outdated way of looking at it.
Right, we're taught it decides your eye color, your height, and that's kind of it. Your lived experience doesn't change your genes.
And that static view of DNA is exactly what the field of epigenetics has completely upended.
Epigenetics. This is where it gets really interesting.
It's fascinating. The sequence itself, the hardware as you called it, does remain largely static, but the expression of those genes is highly dynamic.
Okay, so the analogy from the sources really helped me visualize this.
Yeah.
If your DNA sequence is a massive 1,000-page encyclopedia of how to build you, epigenetics are basically the bookmarks.
The bookmarks, the highlights, yeah.
Right, they are the neon highlighters, the dog-eared pages, and the heavy black redaction lines left by your ancestors.
Let's look at the actual physical mechanism of those bookmarks, because it's not magic. We're talking about microscopic chemical tags, most commonly something called methyl groups.
Methyl groups, what are those exactly?
A methyl group is incredibly simple. It's just one carbon atom bonded to 3 hydrogen atoms.
Okay, pretty basic chemistry.
Very basic. But when this tiny molecule attaches itself to a specific gene, it physically blocks the cellular machinery from reading that gene.
Wait, it blocks it?
Yeah, it effectively turns the gene off or heavily dials down its expression without ever actually altering the underlying genetic code.
So it's like putting a physical padlock on a specific chapter of that encyclopedia.
Exactly that, a padlock. And what researchers have discovered is that these metal padlocks and highlighters aren't just placed randomly during embryonic development.
They aren't.
No, they can be actively placed by the lived experiences of your ancestors, particularly when they went through intense environmental stress or trauma.
This is where the report dives into that landmark study regarding mice and the smell of cherry blossoms.
Yes, the cherry blossom study.
Which, I have to say, sounds so bizarre at first, but it has massive implications. So researchers took a group of mice and exposed them to the distinct scent of cherry blossoms.
Just a simple olfactory stimulus.
Right, but every time this scent was introduced, the mice were given a mild electric foot shock. So over time, the mice developed this deep learned fear response to that specific smell.
Basic Pavlovian conditioning, right?
Yep.
They associated the smell of the flower with physical pain.
Exactly. But the paradigm shift happened when they studied the offspring. So they bred those conditioned mice.
And this is the crucial part.
Yeah, the new generation had never been shocked. They had never experienced the trauma themselves. Yet the very first time they were exposed to the scent of cherry blossoms, they exhibited a massive fear response.
Their stress hormones spiked immediately.
And it even extended to the grandchildren. 2 generations removed from the original trauma, and they were still showing heightened sensitivity and fear of that specific flower.
Now hold on, because I know what you're probably thinking.
I mean, I have to play devil's advocate here, because this goes against literally everything we learn in high school biology.
It does sound like it contradicts Darwin.
Right. Darwinian evolution takes thousands of years of natural selection. Are you telling me a mouse altered its genetic code in a single generation just because of a foot shock?
It's a fair question.
Because that sounds dangerously close to Lamarckian evolution. You know, that old debunked theory that a giraffe got a long neck because his parents stretched to reach high branches and then just passed that stretched neck down to the baby.
It is a vital distinction to make, and honestly, many scientists shared your exact skepticism when these findings first emerged. But we are not talking about Lamarckian mutation here.
We aren't.
No. The underlying DNA sequence of the mice, the base pairs, did not change. The foot shock did not mutate their genes.
Okay, so what actually happened?
What happened was epigenetic inheritance. The intense stress of those repeated shocks caused a massive flood of stress hormones.
Right, fight or flight.
Exactly. And that systemic biological response led to the attachment of methyl groups, those chemical bookmarks we talked about, onto the specific genes that control olfactory receptors in the mice's germ cells, in their sperm.
Wait. So the trauma chemically altered the sperm cells?
Yes. The epigenetic bookmark changed how the genes were expressed in the next generation.
Oh, wow.
So the offspring didn't just inherit a psychological fear, like a phobia. They inherited a physically altered sensory system.
Their bodies actually grew differently.
Their bodies grew more cellular receptors, specifically tuned to detect the cherry blossom scent. The trauma of the ancestor literally reshaped the physical biology of the descendant to make them hypersensitive to a threat they had never actually encountered.
That is just, it's unbelievable. So if an ancestor tags a specific threat with one of these bookmarks, the descendant is born hypervigilant to it.
Exactly. They are primed for it.
So if we scale that up from mice in a lab to actual human history, the sources immediately point to human famines.
Famines offer probably the clearest, most measurable look at human epigenetic inheritance.
Because it's such an extreme stressor.
It's the ultimate stressor. When researchers studied the descendants of populations who survived massive, prolonged starvation amines, the data reveals a profound epigenetic bookmark.
What happens to the body during a famine like that?
During severe starvation, the human body is forced into extreme metabolic adaptation. It has to keep the vital organs functioning on basically 0 calories.
So the ancestor's body essentially highlights the chapter in the DNA on starvation protocols.
Yeah.
And then it slaps a massive padlock on the chapter for burning excess fat.
That is a perfect way to put it. And that highlighted padlocked configuration is passed down through the germline.
So the kids inherit it.
The kids, the grandkids. The descendants of those famine survivors inherit a fundamentally modified metabolism.
So their baseline is just different.
Their biological baseline is permanently bracing for a crisis. It becomes hyper-efficient at extracting every single available calorie from whatever food is consumed and immediately converting it to fat storage.
Because the epigenetic memory is signaling that a severe caloric deficit is an ever-present environmental threat.
Right, the body thinks it's still starving, basically.
Let's bring this down to the everyday reality for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Because millions of people struggle with their weight, their metabolism, and they feel incredibly frustrated by it.
It causes so much guilt.
It does. Let's use the hypothalamus as our model here.
Yeah.
The hypothalamus is the part of your brain that dictates hunger, body temperature, energy expenditure. Imagine it as your body's, office manager.
I like that analogy. The office manager controls the overarching energy budget of the entire biological system.
Right. So if your great-grandfather survived a brutal freezing famine, he sent an epigenetic memo down the lineage to your office manager.
Very urgent memo.
Exactly. So today you are sitting in a climate-controlled apartment, working at a computer, and eating a standard modern diet.
Plenty of food available.
Plenty of food. But your office manager doesn't know that. The office manager is stubbornly following a 100-year-old safety protocol.
And we can look at the physical mechanism of how that office manager actually enforces the protocol, because it isn't just about making you feel hungry.
What else does it do?
The epigenetically altered hypothalamus will actively lower your resting body temperature just to conserve energy.
Wait, it literally turns down the thermostat.
It turns down the thermostat. It will also suppress the release of leptin, which is the hormone that tells you you're full.
Oh, that's cool.
And at the same time, it chronically elevates ghrelin, the hormone that drives intense cravings for dense carbohydrates.
So you're cold, you're never full, and you're craving carbs.
Exactly. It will even alter the ratio of brown fat, which burns energy for heat, to white fat, which strictly stores it. The office manager is pulling dozens of biological levers to ensure you hoard energy.
It's commanding the body to prepare for a catastrophic winter that, given our modern supply chains, might never actually arrive.
And this completely upends how we tend to judge our own bodies. I mean, in modern society, a slow metabolism or a tendency to store fat is widely viewed as a biological flaw.
Yeah, it's seen as a failure of willpower or some kind of medical glitch.
But through the lens of ancestral genetics, it isn't a glitch at all. It is a highly sophisticated, deeply successful survival strategy.
It's the reason you're alive.
Literally, your ancestors lived through an evolutionary bottleneck where the inability to hoard fat meant death. They survived because their bodies learned to hold on to energy, and they gifted that survival mechanism to you.
So the goal here isn't to declare war on your own physiology.
No, not at all. The goal is to understand the historical context of why your office manager is hoarding resources, and then to structure your lifestyle to cooperate with that biology rather than fighting this unwinnable battle against your own inherited armor.
You call it armor, but I have to admit it feels like a burden in a modern context.
Oh, absolutely it does.
Which makes me wonder if our DNA is so incredibly efficient at remembering trauma and starvation, surely it remembers victories too.
It does, yes.
Right, like are there genetic or epigenetic adaptations that actually give us an advantage today rather than just leaving us hyper-vigilant and prone to weight gain?
Absolutely. Not all ancestral gifts are metabolic burdens. And to explore that, the sources take us on this really fascinating geographic pivot.
Oh, right, we move away from Germany.
Yeah, we move from the stationary hills of Germany down to the dynamic coastlines of Italy, specifically regions like Liguria and Sicily.
And the Italian coast is basically the geographic opposite of the Lichtenstein Cave.
Night and day.
Instead of staying put for 120 generations, Liguria and Sicily were the ultimate genetic crossroads of the ancient world.
Constant movement, constant trade.
And the sources specifically highlight the biological footprint of the Phoenicians here. Now, we all know the Phoenicians dominated Mediterranean trade for centuries.
They were the master shipbuilders of the ancient world.
Right, but what's less known is the biological tax and the biological armor they left in the bloodlines of the people living along those trade routes today.
The Phoenicians lived an intense maritime lifestyle, and their descendants inherited a lot more than just an affinity for the sea.
What did they find in the DNA?
Scientists studying the populations in these specific Italian coastal regions have identified concentrated genetic mutations that act as a literal biological shield.
A shield against what?
Against cardiovascular disease, specifically regarding how they process cholesterol.
Okay, I want to dig into the mechanism of that shield, because we constantly hear people complain about the sheer unfairness of that one friend. Right?
Oh, we all have that friend.
The one who can eat mountains of pasta, rich cheeses, cured meats, and their lipid panel comes back absolutely perfect.
Yeah, their doctor says they're doing great.
And we just assume they won the genetic lottery.
Yeah.
But how does this biological shield actually process that kind of rich Mediterranean diet without clogging their arteries?
Well, it comes down to highly specific mutations in how the body handles lipid transport.
Lipid transport. Okay, break that down for me.
Sure. When you consume a heavy diet, cholesterol enters the bloodstream. In a typical vascular system, high levels of LDL cholesterol, the bad kind, can oxidize and embed into the arterial walls.
And that creates the plaque buildup that leads to heart disease.
Exactly. But in these specific coastal populations with Phoenician ancestry, we see mutations in genes related to apolipoproteins.
Glycoprotein.
Yeah. These proteins are the core structural component of high-density lipoproteins, or HDL.
HDL is the good cholesterol, right?
It is. But this mutation makes their HDLs hyper-efficient. It supercharges a process called reverse cholesterol transport.
How does that work?
You can think of HDL particles as basically molecular garbage trucks.
Okay, molecular garbage trucks. I like that.
Their job is to travel through the bloodstream, physically sweep the excess cholesterol out of the arterial walls and transport it back to the liver where it can be broken down and excreted.
And the mutation changes the garbage trucks.
Yes. The genetic mutation found in these populations essentially increases the size and the sweeping capacity of those molecular garbage trucks.
That's incredible.
So they can consume a heavily rich diet, and their vascular system clears the excess with ruthless efficiency, completely preventing plaque formation.
So it's not random luck at all.
Not even a little bit.
It's the result of thousands of years of intense evolutionary pressure. The ancestors of these populations lived in an environment where access to nutrient-dense, high-fat foods was just a staple of survival.
Well, olive oil, fish, nuts.
Yeah. So if your vascular system couldn't handle that diet, you just didn't survive long enough to pass on your genes. The environment essentially curated the genetic code.
It's the concept of creating the perfect soil for specific genetic seeds.
How so?
Well, if you take a plant adapted for a drought and place it in a wetland, it will rot, right?
Sure.
If you take an epigenetic metabolism tuned for famine, like we discussed earlier, and surround it with modern fast food, it develops metabolic syndrome.
It's a mismatch.
A huge mismatch. But the descendants of the Phoenicians inherited a biological machinery forged specifically to process the rich dietary elements of their geographic region.
So the shield against high cholesterol is a direct product of time, geography, and continuous dietary adaptation.
Exactly. It's perfectly adapted to its original environment.
Okay, so we have these incredibly specific regional adaptations. We have 120 generations of stubborn geographic loyalty in Germany.
Right.
We have epigenetic padlocks built by ancient famines. We have hyper-efficient molecular garbage trucks engineered by the Mediterranean diet.
It's a vast library of adaptations.
It really is. But what happens when we leave the region? Like, what happens when a Phoenician biological shield marries a famine-adapted metabolism?
That's where things get complicated.
How do we use this 3,000-year-old information when we are looking toward the future instead of just the past?
That is the critical pivot from just marveling at historical science to actually applying clinical medicine. And it introduces the field of population genetics.
Population genetics.
Yes, particularly regarding conscious parenting.
Okay, I want to push back on a broader cultural trend here, because we are seeing a massive explosion in commercial DNA testing.
Oh, it's everywhere.
It is. People spit in a plastic tube, mail it off to a lab, and get an app notification that tells them, fun fact, you are 5% Viking.
Right, or you share DNA with a specific valley in Scotland.
Exactly. And it's an entertaining parlor trick, and people obviously love sharing it on social media. But beyond the novelty of it, does knowing you are 5% Viking actually offer any practical medical utility?
That's the problem. The commercialization of DNA testing has certainly reduced a lot of complex science to basically entertainment.
It feels very superficial.
It is. That 5% Viking modification is population genetics run through a marketing filter.
But there's real science underneath it.
Absolutely. When we strip away the novelty and look at clinical population genetics, it is one of the most vital preventative medical strategies we possess.
Really?
Yes. Because just as geographic isolation can forge a biological shield against cholesterol, it can also concentrate severe genetic vulnerabilities.
Okay, the sources specifically mention conditions like thalassemia and cystic fibrosis here.
Two very clear examples.
And these aren't just random illnesses that strike without rhyme or reason. They are deeply tethered to specific geographic and ethnic histories.
They are. And to understand why these devastating diseases persist in certain populations, we have to look at a biological phenomenon called the heterozygote advantage.
Heterozygote advantage. What does that mean?
It is a brilliant, albeit sometimes incredibly tragic, evolutionary compromise.
Let's use thalassemia as an example.
Okay. Thalassemia is a blood disorder that severely limits the body's ability to produce hemoglobin, and it is heavily concentrated in populations from the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and South Asia.
But why? Why would evolution preserve a mutation that actively destroys the blood's ability to carry oxygen? That seems counterproductive.
It seems that way until you look at the historical environment. Because of malaria.
It's malaria.
Yes. Thousands of years ago, malaria was the single greatest threat to survival in those specific regions.
Okay.
If an individual inherited 2 copies of the thalassemia mutation, one from each parent, they developed the severe, often fatal form of the disease.
Which is awful.
It is. But if they inherited just 1 copy, making them a heterozygote, They didn't get the severe disease.
So what happened instead?
The slight alteration in their red blood cells made it incredibly difficult for the malaria parasite to actually infect them.
Wow. So it was a defense mechanism.
That single mutation acted as a powerful shield against a regional plague.
So the genetic disease is essentially a side effect of an ancient, desperate attempt to build a biological shield.
Precisely.
And the same dynamic applies to cystic fibrosis, right?
Exactly the same dynamic. Cystic fibrosis is highly concentrated in populations of Northern European descent.
And what was the environmental threat there?
The hypothesis is that carrying one copy of the cystic fibrosis mutation altered fluid secretion in the intestines just enough to provide resistance against massive regional outbreaks of cholera or typhoid.
That is unbelievable.
Evolution makes brutal calculations. It will tolerate a legal recessive disease in a small percentage of the population if the carrier state protects the vast majority from a sweeping pandemic.
This completely reframes how we look at genetic risk. It's not a random curse.
Yeah.
It's literally the collateral damage of your ancestors surviving an epidemic.
That's exactly what it is.
Which brings us to the concept of conscious parenting. How do we use this data today, like practically?
The sources refer to it as cushioning the fall.
Cushioning the fall.
Yeah. In the past, genetic diseases seemed to strike randomly because the ancestral lineage was unknown. Nobody knew what their ancestors had survived.
Right.
Today, if you understand the deep biological history of your ancestry, you do not have to fly blind.
You can actually see it coming.
Prospective parents can undergo targeted clinical screening for these specific hidden mutations prior to conception or during early pregnancy.
Meaning, if you know your family history traces back to the Mediterranean coast, you don't just cross your fingers and hope for the best.
No, you don't have to.
You use that geographical data to look specifically for the thalassemia marker.
By identifying those hidden markers, parents and medical professionals can prepare, they can intervene.
They have options now.
They do. They can utilize modern reproductive technologies to ensure the mutation is not passed on. It is the ultimate synthesis of historical data and modern agency.
You are reading the epigenetic bookmarks,
Yes.
acknowledging the evolutionary vulnerabilities forged by plagues millennia ago and leveraging that insight for preventative care.
You transform your DNA from a passive historical curiosity into an active shield of your own making for the next generation.
Leveraging ancient data for modern preventative care. That ties everything together perfectly.
It really does.
I mean, we started by looking at the sheer endurance of 120 generations staying on one hill in Germany.
A crazy story.
Then we explored how the physical chemistry of a methyl group can padlock a gene and pass the trauma of a famine down to a modern metabolism.
And don't forget the molecular garbage trucks.
Right. We broke down how the Mediterranean diet forged hyper-efficient garbage trucks to sweep cholesterol from our arteries.
All geographic adaptations.
And finally, we've seen how clinical population genetics can track the collateral damage of ancient plagues to protect our children today.
When you step back and really look at the aggregate of all those stories, the overarching reality is just undeniable.
What's the biggest takeaway for you?
That your DNA is the most resilient, complex messenger system on the planet.
It's an unbroken chain.
It is. Every single cell functioning in your body right now is a physical dispatch. It is a message delivered by millions of individuals who successfully adapted to freezing climates, endured starvation, navigated maritime trade routes, survived localized plagues, and managed to continue the line so that you could be here today.
Let me say that directly to you, the listener. You are the sum of millions of victories.
It's true.
Every single ancestor who lived long enough to pass on their genetic material won a seemingly impossible battle against the odds, and the physical evidence of their victory is currently beating inside your chest.
It is an incredibly empowering realization when it finally clicks.
It really is. And if you want to stop feeling like a stranger in your own body and actually learn how to read the history written inside your cells, you really have to look at the sources that built this discussion.
They are essential reading.
The long-read Genetic Odyssey, 3,000 Years in Your Cells, and the accompanying clinical guides on ancestry results are invaluable tools for decoding your own biological library.
They allow you to stop seeing yourself as just an isolated individual navigating the present moment and start seeing yourself as the vanguard of a 3,000-year-old lineage.
You are the current custodian of an ancient archive.
Well said.
But before we sign off, I know you had a final question you wanted to throw out there based on everything we've covered regarding how those archives are actually written.
Yes, I do, because we've spent this entire time looking backward, right?
Right. We've been looking at the ancestors.
We've examined how our ancestors' environments, their diets, and their intense stressors placed chemical bookmarks on our DNA that dictate how our bodies respond to the world today.
The padlocks and the highlighters.
Exactly. But that mechanism didn't stop in the Bronze Age.
Oh.
It is happening right now in real time.
Wow.
So the question is, if their lived experiences wrote the biological code you rely on, what modern environments, what chronic stresses, or what dietary habits are you exposing yourself to today that will become the epigenetic bookmarks your descendants will have to navigate 120 generations into the future?
That is a staggering thought. Are we writing bookmarks of resilience, or are we writing bookmarks of chronic stress?
We're writing something.
We will leave you to think about what legacy you are physically encoding right now. Remember, genetic awareness is the base. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.